My name is Amara, I'm 28 years old, and I had just found out that I was pregnant with my first child. My husband, Ethan, is 31, and he was over the moon when I told him. He couldn't stop smiling, and I couldn't stop crying happy tears. We'd been hoping for this moment for a long time, and it finally felt like everything was falling into place. Ethan wanted to share the news right away, and since his family is very close, he decided we should tell them over dinner. His mom was hosting, so it felt like the perfect chance. I'll never forget that evening, the clinking of forks on plates, the chatter filling the room, and my heart pounding in my chest as we waited for the right moment. Ethan stood up, cleared his throat, and looked at me with that excited sparkle in his eyes. Then he said, "We wanted you all to be the first to know. Amara and I are expecting." For a second, the room went completely silent. Then came the cheers, the laughter, the hugs. His mother burst into tears, his father raised a toast, and I felt so loved and accepted. But not everyone shared that joy. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Madison, Ethan's sister. She's only a year younger than him, 29, and she has always carried this edge with me. Like no matter what I do, she'll never let me forget I wasn't born into the family. She clapped and forced a smile, but her eyes told another story. Cold, jealous, almost angry. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe she just had something else on her mind. But as people came over to hug me, congratulating me and asking about baby names, I noticed Madison hanging back, watching me with that tight, fake smile. When she finally did approach, she gave me a quick hug and whispered, "Wow, you didn't waste any time, did you?" Then she pulled away, still smiling like she'd said nothing wrong. It stung, but I kept quiet. This was supposed to be a happy night, and I didn't want to ruin it. Ethan didn't even catch it. He was too busy laughing with his cousins and pouring wine for his parents. He has always trusted his sister, always believed she had good intentions, and I didn't want to sound like I was overreacting. Still, something in me knew that wasn't the end of it. Madison's smile didn't reach her eyes, and I could feel it. She was already planning something. I just didn't realize how far she'd be willing to go to try and tear me down. The days after our big announcement should have been filled with nothing but joy, but somehow Madison always found a way to slip in little remarks that chipped away at my happiness. It started small. At Sunday brunch with Ethan's family, Madison looked me up and down and said with a laugh, "Careful carrying that plate, Amara. You're already acting like you're too fragile to do anything." Everyone chuckled politely, but my stomach tightened. I forced a smile, pretending it didn't bother me. It didn't stop there. At a dinner with friends, she leaned across the table and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I hope you've got maternity clothes lined up because your style was already questionable. Can't imagine what you'll look like when you're bigger." The words stung, but Ethan just shook his head and said, "That's Madison." Always joking. His attempt to lighten the moment only made me feel more alone, as if my hurt wasn't worth acknowledging. When we were at the store one afternoon, she tagged along and started pointing at items in the baby aisle. "You don't really need all this expensive stuff," she said, smirking. "Back in the day, people rubbed whiskey on a baby's gums for teething. Worked fine." She winked, as if it were a clever tip. My heart dropped. She knew I would never consider something like that, but she loved making me look naive for caring about safety. Another time, she called me late in the evening, sounding unusually sweet. "I found this herbal tea that's supposed to help expecting moms relax," she said. "It's a little bitter, but trust me, it works." I looked it up after we hung up and discovered it wasn't even recommended for pregnant women. In fact, it could trigger complications. That was the moment I realized her help was never really help at all. It was a game to her, a way to keep me off balance and unsure of myself. Every jab was disguised as humor, every piece of advice wrapped in false concern. If I tried to defend myself, I risked looking sensitive, and she knew it. Ethan's blind faith in his sister made it worse. "She doesn't mean it, Amara," he'd say gently. "She just has a weird sense of humor." He didn't see the gleam in her eyes when she delivered those lines, like she was daring me to break. I found myself dreading family gathering, rehearsing in my head how I'd respond to her next jab. Should I laugh it off? Should I bite back? No matter what I chose, she always seemed one step ahead, pushing just enough to leave me rattled while looking perfectly innocent to everyone else. Deep down, I knew these weren't harmless jokes. They were calculated, each one sharpening a knife she was slowly twisting. What unsettled me most wasn't just the words she used, but the way she seemed to enjoy watching me squirm, as though my discomfort was entertainment. And though Ethan tried to reassure me, I could feel a storm building. I just didn't know when it would break. Ethan's mother's birthday was supposed to be a warm family celebration. The house was filled with decorations, music floated through the rooms, and the dining table groaned under platters of food. I'd even helped bake her favorite cake, wanting to show her how much she meant to me. For most of the evening, everything felt cheerful. relatives exchanging stories, children running around, and laughter echoing off the walls. For a little while, I allowed myself to relax. But when it came time for toasts, I noticed Madison rising with her glass. She wore that polished smile she always put on when she wanted attention. Everyone quieted down, expecting something heartfelt. She started with kind words for her mother, thanking her for being a role model. Then her tone shifted, almost playfully, though her eyes glinted with something sharper. "And of course," she added, turning toward me and Ethan, "we can't forget the newest chapter in this family. Amara making sure my brother never escapes fatherhood. Some girls know exactly how to keep a man tied down." The words landed like a slap. At first, there was stunned silence. Then a ripple of awkward chuckles, the kind people give when they don't know how else to react. I sat frozen, my cheeks burning. My hands clenched under the table, and I fought the urge to stand and run. She had managed to twist the most beautiful part of my life into something dirty, like my child was nothing but a scheme. I glanced at Ethan. His jaw tightened, but instead of stopping her or correcting her, he gave an uncomfortable laugh and muttered, "Okay, Madison, enough." She shrugged, sipping her drink, as if she had only made a harmless joke. Conversation resumed, but I could still feel the eyes on me, the whispers hidden behind polite smile. The joy I had felt earlier in the evening was gone, replaced with humiliation that settled deep in my chest. After the guests began drifting home and the dishes were cleared, Ethan finally pulled me aside. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry she said that. She crosses the line sometime. You know she doesn't mean it." His attempt at comfort only deepened the ache. How could he dismiss something so cruel, as if it were a passing comment? I wanted him to tell her it was unacceptable, to stand up for me in front of everyone. Instead, he treated it like another one of her quirks, nothing worth fighting over. I swallowed my anger, not wanting to start an argument in his mother's home, but inside, a wall began to build. I loved my husband, but in that moment, I felt isolated, as though I was facing Madison's venom on my own. Walking out of the house that night, I promised myself something. If she was willing to humiliate me in front of the entire family, she wasn't going to stop there. And if Ethan refused to protect me from her, I would have to protect myself. One evening, I stepped into the hallway to grab a sweater I had left in the coat closet. As I reached for the door, I froze at the sound of Madison's voice drifting from the next room. She was on the phone, speaking in that hushed but eager tone people use when they're sharing something juicy. At first, I considered walking away, but then I caught my own name. "I've got it all figured out," she was saying, a laugh bubbling out of her. "Everyone already thinks she's too delicate to handle real life, so it won't be hard to show them she's not ready to be a wife, let alone a mother. Just wait for the shower. I'll finally prove it." My stomach dropped. I leaned against the wall, holding my breath so she wouldn't know I was there. She continued, sounding almost giddy as she listed things she planned to bring up. Stories twisted to sound like irresponsibility, little mistakes from the past turned into proof of weakness. To her, it wasn't just a family event, it was a stage, and I was the target. I felt the blood rush to my ears. The baby shower was supposed to be a celebration, a chance to share happiness with the people closest to us. In Madison's mind, though, it was an opportunity to tear me down. My hands trembled as I listened, anger mixing with disbelief. She wasn't satisfied with sly remarks or embarrassing comments. She wanted a spectacle, something public enough to leave me humiliated. When she ended the call with a triumphant laugh, I slipped quietly back into the living room, forcing myself to look calm. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't tell Ethan. Not yet. Every time I had tried to explain how cruel she could be, he brushed it aside. If I warned him now, he'd either dismiss my fears again or worse, accidentally alert her that I knew. So instead, I swallowed my urge to confront her and started thinking carefully. If she was preparing to ruin me in front of everyone, I needed to be ready when the moment came. That didn't mean trading insults or starting fights. It meant keeping my ears open, gathering proof, and planning my own response. Quiet, patient, calculated. That night, lying in bed beside Ethan while he scrolled on his phone, I stared at the ceiling, mind racing. He had no idea what his sister was plotting. Part of me wanted to shake him, to make him see, but another part understood I'd have to handle this myself. Madison thought she was clever, but she didn't realize I was already a step ahead. The baby shower was still weeks away, but the countdown had begun. And while Madison was busy preparing her little performance, I silently vowed she wouldn't get the ending she imagined. The weeks leading up to the shower were filled with planning, decorations, and endless lists. Madison suddenly positioned herself as the one saving the day, offering to take over arrangements so I could rest. To everyone else, she looked like the perfect sister-in-law, helpful, attentive, practically running the show. To me, it was nothing but another performance. She called caterers, picked out a theme, and told Ethan how she was making sure everything was flawless for me. Whenever he repeated her praises, I forced a smile, though inside my stomach twisted. I had heard her plans. Every cheerful suggestion, every generous offer felt like another layer of her trap being laid right in front of me. One afternoon, I stopped by her place to drop off some invitations she had left behind. While she was in the kitchen, her planner sat open on the counter. I didn't mean to snoop, but my eyes caught a page filled with scribbles, lists of games, notes about decorations, and in the margins, comments that made my skin crawl. Guess how spoiled she really is. Lazy mom-to-be contest. The words were written like little jokes, but I knew exactly what they meant. She wasn't planning fun games. She was setting up ways to humiliate me under the guise of party entertainment. Later, I overheard her on the phone again, laughing as she spread stories about me. She told someone I refused to lift a finger around the house, that Ethan did everything while I laughed. She painted me as pampered and entitled, carefully planting the idea so that by the time of the shower, people would already see me through her lens. The thought of all those whispers reaching my friends, his family, maybe even his co-workers, filled me with dread. But I didn't let it show. If I stormed into Ethan's office demanding he rein her in, it would only look like I was paranoid. If I confronted her head-on, she'd twist it back on me, acting wounded while I looked like the unstable one. So instead, I smiled at her when she showed me centerpieces she had chosen. I thanked her when she sent me updates about catering. I nodded along when she pretended to care about my opinion. Inside, though, I was steadying myself, bracing for what was coming. Every move she made confirmed what I already knew. She wanted me flustered, defensive, broken down in front of everyone. But I refused to hand her that victory. I decided to stay calm, to let her believe I was walking right into her performance, without a clue. She thought she was building the perfect stage, but I was quietly preparing for my own moment. The closer the date drew, the more confident I became. If Madison wanted to expose me, she had no idea she was setting herself up instead. And when the day arrived, I would be ready. The day of the shower arrived with balloons tied to chairs, pastel streamers across the walls, and tables stacked with carefully wrapped gifts. Laughter and chatter filled the room, and for a while, everything looked like a celebration. Friends and relatives hugged me, complimented the decorations, and asked about the baby. On the surface, it was perfect, but I felt the tension running underneath it all. Madison moved around like the star of the event, accepting credit for every detail, her smile sharp as glass. As the afternoon went on, I could see her waiting for her moment. She finally stood up, glass in hand, calling for attention. The clinking cut through the noise, and people turned toward her with expectant faces. At first, she spoke about family, about how excited she was to welcome a new little one. Her voice dripped with sincerity, enough to make even me wonder if she might surprise me with kindness. Then she shifted. With a laugh that rang a little too loud, she said, "Of course, we all know Amara. She's had quite the journey. Remember when she couldn't hold down that job? Poor Ethan had to carry everything. And that little incident in college. Well, let's just say she's always known how to keep life interesting." She smirked, letting the words hang in the air. I felt dozens of eyes land on me. Gasps and uneasy chuckles rippled through the crowd as people exchanged glances, unsure how to react. My face grew hot, not because of shame, but because I could see the exact performance she had promised to put on. She wasn't sharing memories, she was twisting them into daggers, making me look careless and unreliable in the middle of my own celebration. The silence that followed was heavy. Guests leaned forward, waiting to see if I'd crumble, cry, or lash out. Madison's gaze locked on mine, triumphant, certain she had won. But instead of falling apart, I straightened in my chair and smiled. Not the forced kind I'd worn at past gathering, but calm and steady. I met her eyes, and for the first time she faltered ever so slightly. She had expected a scene, but I had been waiting for them. Her words couldn't shake me because I had already heard her plan whispered over the phone weeks before. I let the pause stretch, sipping from my glass with measured ease, then simply said, "Thank you, Madison." My tone was light, almost amused, as though her attempt had been nothing more than a clumsy joke. The room shifted instantly. Her cruel little story lost its power without the reaction she craved. People murmured, some shaking their heads, others looking away uncomfortably. The energy moved on, but Madison's face told the truth. She was furious. She had set the stage for my humiliation, yet all she managed was to expose herself. And though no one else knew it yet, this was only the beginning of what I had prepared for her. The room was still buzzing after Madison's so-called toast, whispers moving from table to table, when I finally rose from my seat. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't quiver. I had been waiting for this moment. Madison's smirk lingered, as if she thought I was about to defend myself with excuses. Instead, I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of family and friends who had gathered to celebrate. "I think it's time we clear a few things up," I said evenly. The chatter quieted, all eyes fixed on me. I reached into my bag, and pulled out a small folder I had tucked away days earlier. Inside were printouts and notes I'd carefully collected, copies of text messages, written statements, and a timeline I had pieced together. Holding one page, I began, "For weeks now, someone has been spreading stories about me. Not just little jokes, but deliberate lies." I read aloud a message Madison had sent to a friend. "Can't wait for this shower. I'll show everyone she's not cut out for this. She's lazy, spoiled, and Ethan does everything." Gasps rippled through the room. Faces turned toward Madison, her expression hardening. I didn't stop there. I flipped to another page and recited a different text where she had mocked not just me, but her own brother, calling him blind and gullible. Murmurs grew louder, some guests shaking their heads in disbelief. A cousin whispered, "Unbelievable," while Ethan's mother looked as if she'd been struck. Then I calmly shared what I'd overheard weeks earlier, the phone call where she bragged about planning to ruin me at this very shower. I hadn't told Ethan then, but now, with everyone listening, the truth carried weight. "This wasn't about me being sensitive or misunderstanding jokes," I said, my voice firm. "This was intentional." Madison tried to cut in, laughing nervously. "She's twisting things, you guys. She's dramatic." But before she could finish, I pulled out one last piece, a receipt tied to a canceled catering order she had attempted to sabotage, blaming the company when in reality she had interfered herself. It was undeniable. The room erupted with low voices, but none of them in her defense. Guests who had once smiled politely at her now looked away in disgust. A few even whispered angrily, realizing she had spoken ill of them too. Her mask had slipped completely, and no amount of charm could fix it. Ethan sat frozen beside me, eyes wide as he read the papers himself. His disbelief was written across his face, the slow dawning realization that his sister had been undermining me all along. For once, he didn't try to smooth things over. He didn't laugh it off. He looked at me, then at her, and his silence was heavier than any words. I stayed composed, tucking the folder back into my bag. "This was supposed to be about joy," I said quietly, "and I won't let anyone turn it into cruelty." The tables had turned. Madison's attempt at humiliation had backfired, and now she stood exposed in the very spotlight she had created. The silence after I finished speaking was heavy, broken only by the shifting of chairs and hushed voices. Madison's face flushed deep red, but almost instantly she tried to recover, clutching her glass like a lifeline. "You're all taking this the wrong way," she insisted, her tone wobbling between indignation and wounded innocence. "I was just trying to lighten the mood. You know how Amara can be sensitive." Her attempt at pity fell flat. Guests didn't nod along this time. Instead, they exchanged looks that made her squirm. A few cousins shook their heads, while one of Ethan's uncles muttered under his breath, clearly unimpressed. The performance she had perfected for so long was unraveling, and the more she spoke, the clearer it became. Ethan's mother, usually the peacekeeper, suddenly rose from her seat. Her expression was sharp, her voice carrying across the room. "Enough, Madison. This was meant to celebrate new life, not tear someone down. How dare you treat your brother's wife this way, and in my home?" The sternness in her tone left no space for argument. Madison's mouth opened, then closed again. She tried to reach for sympathy, saying, "Mom, you don't understand, I was just..." But her mother cut her off. "Don't you dare play the victim. I heard those messages. I heard what Amara just read. Do you think we're all fools?" The disappointment in her eyes spoke louder than the words, and Madison faltered, visibly shrinking under the weight of her mother's anger. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Guests who had once been polite to Madison avoided her gaze. A couple of friends excused themselves quietly, murmuring that they'd had enough for one day. Others followed, shaking their heads as they gathered their coats. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore, it was disgust. One aunt even whispered to me as she hugged me goodbye, "She showed her true colors today. Don't let her drag you down." Madison stood alone near the table, her shoulders stiff, trying to maintain composure as the crowd thinned. She forced a shaky laugh, muttering about people being dramatic, but no one entertained her this time. The room, once filled with cheer, had turned cold toward her, leaving her stranded in the wreckage of her own making. Ethan stayed silent through it all, his eyes fixed on his sister. He didn't come to her defense, didn't soften the blow, and that silence was more damning than any lecture. For the first time, she realized he wouldn't shield her from consequence. As the last guests drifted out, the house felt emptier, but the message was clear. Madison had tried to turn the day into my downfall, and instead she had destroyed her own standing. Whatever control she thought she had over the family's opinion evaporated in that moment. And though she lingered, desperate for someone to side with her, not a single hand reached out. When the last of the guests had gone and the house grew quiet, I sat heavily on the couch, exhaustion washing over me. The decorations still hung on the walls, but the sparkle of the day had dulled. Ethan lowered himself beside me, his face pale, his eyes clouded with guilt. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, finally, he turned toward me, voice low. "I should have listened," he said, each word heavy. "All those times you tried to tell me, and I brushed it off. I thought she was just being herself, but I was blind. I let you face her cruelty alone." His hand found mine, holding tight, as though afraid I might pull away. The sincerity in his tone broke something loose in me. For months, I had carried the weight by myself, second-guessing whether I was overreacting. Hearing him finally acknowledge, it made my chest ache in relief. "I needed you to see it," I whispered, my throat tight. "I felt like I was fighting a battle you couldn't even see." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You won't fight it alone again. I promise." Later that evening, after cleaning up the remnants of the party, Ethan stepped outside to call his sister. I stayed in the living room, heart pounding as muffled voices drifted through the window. His tone was steady, sharper than I'd ever heard when speaking to her. Though I couldn't make out every word, I caught enough, crossed a line. No excuses. And finally, "Until you get help, I can't have you around us." When he came back inside, he looked drained but resolute. "I told her we need space," he said simply. "She won't be part of our lives until she changes. Our family comes first now." For the first time, I felt truly protected, not just by circumstance, but by his choice to stand with me. We sat together in the dim light, his arm around my shoulders. The house was quiet, and for once, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. I leaned into him, letting the tension ease out of my body. The fear of being dismissed, the loneliness of carrying my hurt in silence, it all began to lift. That night, as I drifted towards sleep, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: safe. Ethan's apology wasn't just words. It was backed by action. And in that, I finally felt seen, not as a burden or someone too sensitive, but as his partner, equal and respected. The road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but in that moment, wrapped in his embrace, I knew we had turned a corner. Madison had tried to break me, but instead, she had given Ethan and me a chance to rebuild stronger than before. The seasons shifted, and before I knew it, the months of waiting had passed. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady hum of machines and the gentle encouragement of the nurse. After long hours of labor, I finally held my baby in my arms. Tiny fingers curled around mine, and tears blurred my vision. The exhaustion, the fear, the pain, it all faded beneath the warmth of that new life pressed against my chest. Ethan sat close, his hand resting gently on the blanket that wrapped our child. His face, usually composed, glowed with awe. "You did it," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You both did." In that moment, nothing else existed but us, the three of us, bound together in a way that nothing and no one could disturb. Messages flooded in as relatives learned of the birth, but there was one name absent from the list. Madison hadn't been told. She hadn't been invited. And for once, there was no debate about it. Ethan had been clear from the start. This was our boundary, and it would be respected. "No one who threatens your peace will have access to this moment," he had told me firmly. Those words echoed now as I looked down at the sleeping face of our child, safe in my arms. Later that evening, Ethan's mother arrived, her eyes soft with pride as she met her grandchild. She didn't mention Madison, didn't ask if she could be included. The unspoken agreement hung in the air. Family meant love and respect, and anyone unwilling to offer that had no place here. As visitors came and went, the room filled with flowers, gifts, and quiet laughter. But even in the happiest chaos, I kept returning to the weight of my baby against me, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat so new and yet so strong. I thought back to all the moments Madison had tried to tear me down, the digs, the cruel toast, the whispered lies. She had wanted me to feel small, to doubt myself, to crumble under the weight of her bitterness. Instead, I had found strength I didn't know I carried. She hadn't broken me. She had pushed me closer to the man who now kissed the top of my head and whispered promises of a future we would protect together. As night fell and the room quieted, I sat in the dim light, rocking gently, Ethan dozing in the chair beside me. I looked down at the tiny face pressed against me, soft breaths rising and falling. A surge of peace filled me. Whatever storms lay behind us, they had led to this perfect, quiet miracle. Madison's absence was not a loss. It was a gift. She had written herself out of this moment, and in doing so, she had freed us to begin our life without her shadow. Holding my child, I knew with certainty. Her cruelty had only made me stronger. Her betrayal had bound Ethan and me closer, and nothing she had done could touch what we had built. Do you think I was right to cut Madison out after everything, or should I have tried to forgive her? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.